Be back with you again for another 5 at 5 today in the book of Jonah. We read yesterday that God called Jonah to go to Nineveh and to call them to repent, but we saw that Jonah refused to go. He didn't want to go. So instead, he got on a ship and he went the exact opposite way, trying to run from God's presence. So let's continue today. We're going to read verses 4 through 6. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." So we've got Jonah. He is desperately trying to run away from God, and obviously he can't do it. So God, he hurls this great storm at the ship. He was getting Jonah's attention. The storm was so great that the ship almost broke apart. The sailors are afraid. They're freaking out. They're throwing cargo overboard, trying to lighten the ship, trying to do whatever they can do. But, of course, nothing helps. And I don't know how, but Jonah was asleep the whole time. He was sleeping through it. So the captain, he runs down and he wakes up Jonah. And he says, "What are you doing? Start crying out to your God, because maybe he can help us." Again, just like yesterday, this shows us the condition of Jonah's heart. His feet were running away from God, and his heart followed his feet. He was just going down and down away from God. His heart was becoming increasingly numb towards God. He was so numb, he was so out of touch with all this, that he was actually able to sleep during the storm that God was hurling at him. And if we're not careful, our lives can start to look exactly like the life of Jonah. Maybe at one time you were walking in step with God, and then you started to slowly drift away from Him. Your feet and your heart were going away. It all starts with small steps in the wrong direction, but after a while, small steps, they can actually add up and increase to get you a long way away. I pray that your heart has not drifted away from God like Jonah's heart did. I pray that you're not spiritually asleep. See, the captain's words to Jonah, they have a double meaning. First of all, he says, "Hey, wake up. We're going to die. You need to wake up. Get up." Physically. This was a wake-up call. Physically. But also spiritually. It was time for Jonah to wake up. God was clearly trying to get his attention. So Jonah just needed to wake up spiritually, to repent of his sin, to confess his sins before the Lord, and to start living out his faith, to respond in obedience rather than disobedience. Maybe this is God's wake-up call to you. Maybe you relate to Jonah in the story. Maybe you've been walking a little bit a ways, and maybe over time that's just turned into a long way away from God. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today is what this teaches us about God's character. God hates sin, and He hates when we live in sin, but we see from the story of Jonah that even when we are living in sin, God doesn't give up on us. God pursued Jonah even though he was running away from Him. God followed, God pursued. That is proof of God's love for us. Now, you might think that the more loving thing for God to do will just be to leave Him alone, but that is not true. That's not correct. God pursued Jonah because of His love for him. He was going after him. He was saying, "Do the right thing. Look, I love you, Jonah. I want you to respond properly. Come to me." And He's doing the same thing to all of us. God might do something to wake you up from your spiritual sleep. And He does that all because of His great love for you. I'll see you.